It started on a quiet Tuesday morning at exactly 8:47 a.m. The sound of a knock broke the calm, followed by the slap of paper against my chest. A pink eviction notice, stamped, sealed, and demanding that I vacate my property within 72 hours. The problem was simple. I already owned the house, paid for it in full, no mortgage, no lien, no question. Just me, my coffee, and the deed locked safely in my filing cabinet. Delivering that notice was the newly elected HOA president, a woman named Brenda Cowich. Late 50s, hair so tightly sprayed it looked bulletproof, and a leopard print cardigan that screamed authority she didn't actually have. She stood there like she was serving a criminal warrant, flanked by two hired security guards who looked as confused as I did. In her mind, this was power. Her moment. The morning she got to play sheriff in her suburban kingdom. She announced to anyone who would listen that the neighborhood had standards, and I apparently wasn't meeting them. I didn't react. Didn't argue. I just let her walk away because I already knew something she didn't. What she'd just started would become the most expensive mistake of her life. My name is Garrett. I'm 45 years old, and before I ever set foot in Pinehurst Meadows, I spent 12 years in the Marine Corps, 2 deployments, more sand than sleep, and a back injury that ended my career early. The Corps taught me discipline, patience, and one rule that never fails: adapt or die. That lesson carried me here. When I retired, I used my VA loan and modest pension to buy a small home in Pinehurst Meadows, a neatly planned community just outside Charlotte, North Carolina. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. 3 bedrooms, a decent yard, and peace. For the first time in years, I had peace. Renovation became my therapy. I spent weekends at hardware stores, learning from YouTube videos, teaching myself how to rebuild things the right way. Every new skill, every small improvement, turned that little ranch house into a home I was proud of. And then I discovered something interesting. Opportunity. Foreclosures. Estate sales and distressed properties were popping up all over the neighborhood. Houses selling for half their value, just waiting for someone to fix them. So I started buying them quietly. Using an LLC called Summit Holdings, I purchased 6 more homes over 4 years. All rentals, all clean, all maintained better than half the HOA board members' own houses. By the time Brenda came along, I owned 7 properties in total. 6 were rented to good people: a teacher, a nurse, a retired couple, and a small family trying to get by. The rent covered my expenses, and life was calm. I stayed invisible, off the radar, and perfectly content. Pinehurst Meadows was like any other suburban HOA. About 140 homes, mostly middle-class families and retirees. $85 a month for lawn care in the shared areas, a pool nobody used, and a clubhouse that smelled like burnt coffee and old meetings. For years, the board was harmless, just volunteers approving budgets and planning cookouts. But in 2023, the previous president, a retired accountant, moved to Florida. No one wanted the position, except Brenda. She ran her campaign like she was applying for a seat in Congress, promised order, higher standards, and better property values. Out of 140 homes, only 19 people voted. She won easily, and the moment she did, things started to change. I met her one scorching July afternoon. The air shimmered with heat, and I was outside replacing my mailbox post when I heard heels tapping on my driveway. Not flip-flops, not sneakers, heels. That was the first sign something was off. She walked up like a CEO inspecting her investment, perfume cloud first, clipboard second. Her tone was polite but sharp, the kind that sounds friendly but isn't. She introduced herself as the new president and talked about community standards, lawn heights, and trash can visibility. She had a clipboard full of boxes to check, and she was already looking for her next target. From that moment on, I knew what she was, a power addict with a new stage. 2 weeks later, the first notice arrived. Certified mail, official letterhead, the works. A violation for parking a commercial vehicle in my driveway. A fine of $50 per day if I didn't remove it. My vehicle was a blue Ford F-150. 3/4 ton, personal use, no logos, no signage. It didn't even qualify as commercial under the HOA's own rules. But Brenda didn't care. I double-checked the HOA covenants. Section 4.7b to be exact. No commercial vehicles over 1 ton or bearing advertising markings. I was completely within regulation. I sent her an email with proof, photos, and even a highlighted copy of the rule book. The next morning, her response came back cold and final. The violation stood. The HOA, she said, retained discretionary authority in all enforcement matters. 2 words that shouldn't exist together. Discretionary authority. At the next HOA meeting, I went to appeal in person. The clubhouse smelled like damp carpet and broken air conditioning. I expected a board of people, maybe a few residents at least. Instead, there was just Brenda, sitting alone behind a folding table with a gavel still showing an Amazon price tag. The treasurer and secretary positions were vacant, she said, so she was handling all functions herself, judge, jury, and executioner. I presented my evidence calmly, the photos, the specs, the rules. She didn't even look. Just tapped her gavel and said the violation stood. Through the window behind her, I could see my neighbor's house 2 streets over. Parked in his driveway was a Chevy Silverado, same size and class as my truck. No violations, no warnings, no pink letters taped to his door. That neighbor, of course, was one of Brenda's close friends. It was clear what was happening. It wasn't about the truck. It wasn't about the lawn or the color of my door. It was about control, her control. The kind of control that grows when no one pushes back. Over the next 6 weeks, the letters came like clockwork, a new violation every few days. Grass too tall, even though it measured under the limit. Trash can visible too long, even when it wasn't. Paint. Color not approved. Though it was the same builder beige from 2010. Even a noise complaint about a small wind chime hanging by my porch. Each one was a reminder of what she thought she could get away with. But while she was documenting me, I was documenting her. Every email, every photo, every contradictory decision she made. Every friendly resident who mysteriously never got fined because this wasn't just an argument anymore. It was a pattern, a trail of harassment and favoritism, perfectly timed, perfectly traceable. And if the Marine Corps taught me one thing, it's that you don't waste your energy fighting battles you can win with strategy. So while Brenda thought she was tightening her grip, I was already preparing my counterstrike, quietly, carefully, and completely by the book. She thought she could take my house with a pink slip and a power trip. But what she didn't know was that she had just started a fight she could never win. And I was about to remind her, in the most professional, legal, and devastating way possible, who really owned this neighborhood. The next wave of violations came faster than junk mail. Every week, another pink envelope, another accusation that twisted reality into paperwork. Grass too tall, it read, though I'd measured it myself, 2.7 inches, well under the 3-inch limit. Garbage cans visible too long. Unapproved front door color, even though I hadn't changed it since moving in. The same builder beige from 2010. The last straw was almost comical. Garden ornament exceeding height restriction, it said, referring to my stone gnome. Measured at 11.5 inches, half an inch under the 12-inch maximum, each letter came with the same line at the bottom. Fines accrue at $50 per day until compliance. By October, Brenda's phantom tally had reached $850. Even my mail carrier started giving me sympathetic looks. One morning, she handed me another pink envelope and asked, "What did you do to make the HOA lady so mad?" I smiled and said, "Existed. I decided enough was enough. I hired Consuela Verne, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. She was a solo practitioner with a reputation for dismantling overreaching boards like Brenda's. Her rate was $250 an hour, but worth every penny. After reviewing my case, Consuela drafted a cease and desist letter citing selective enforcement, harassment patterns, and failure to follow due process. A week later, Brenda fired back through a large downtown law firm. The letter dripped with arrogance. "Mr. Garrett's allegations are meritless. The board reserves all enforcement rights. Further frivolous correspondence will be met with appropriate legal action." Then another violation arrived. Mailbox post deteriorated and unsightly. I stared at it in disbelief. The post was made of pressure-treated cedar, the kind that naturally weathers to a silvery gray patina landscapers actually charge extra to imitate. Still, she fined me another $50 a day. The total now stood at $2,200. Consuela sighed when she heard. Legally, you're right on every point, she told me. But HOA litigation is slow and expensive. Sometimes the smartest move is to comply. But that wasn't how I operated. The Marines taught me something Consuela didn't fully grasp. Bullies don't stop when you comply. They stop when you make them stop. That night, I pulled out my research binder, a relic from when I first got into property investment. I remembered a North Carolina statute, 47F 3-1-18, which gave property owners the right to request HOA records with 10 days written notice. If the HOA refused, they could face fines, court orders, even personal liability. So I drafted a formal request. Meeting minutes, financial statements, violation logs, and contracts from the past 3 years. I sent it by certified mail and waited. 9 days later, Brenda's reply came. All financial documents are currently undergoing audit and unavailable. Other materials will be provided when the audit is complete. Estimated timeline, 60-90 days. 60 to 90 days for something that should have been a simple email? That wasn't delay. That was cover-up. So I turned to the one place Brenda couldn't control, the neighborhood Facebook group. I posted a simple message. Anyone else getting unusual HOA violations lately? 47 comments poured in within 3 hours. Iris, my 70-something neighbor, sent me a private message. She'd been cited for weed overgrowth, except the so-called weeds were native pollinator plants she'd nurtured for years. When I saw her at the mailbox the next morning, her hands were trembling as she held yet another pink notice. Then came the new family, fined for having a portable basketball hoop they only used on weekends. Meanwhile, Brenda's inner circle, her book club friends, had RVs parked for months, patchy lawns, even collapsing fences. Not a single violation among them. I met Iris again at the hardware store a week later. She looked exhausted. Her voice trembled as she said, "Brenda mentioned a buyer for my house. Said her cousin runs a flipping company." And that's when it clicked. This wasn't random harassment. It was a scheme. Pressure homeowners until they give up. Force them to sell at a discount. Funnel the sales to Brenda's cousin and take a cut. I drove home in silence, my jaw tight, fury cold and calculated. Game on. Late November it happened. A pink paper thicker than usual. Not a violation, but an eviction notice. The same one that landed on my chest at 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. It looked official. Seal, signature, legal jargon. Notice to vacate premises due to unpaid fines totaling $1,200 constituting material breach of HOA covenants. You are hereby required to vacate the property at 428 Birchwood Drive within 72 hours. The notice cited North Carolina Statute 47F 3-166, except Brenda had misquoted it. The law covered liens, not evictions. HOAs can't evict owners. They can foreclose through court, a process that takes months with hearings and redemption periods. You can't just print a fake document and threaten someone to leave their own house, but Brenda clearly didn't care. That morning, she showed up in my driveway with 2 hired security guards, polo shirts embroidered with Pinnacle Security Services and cheap earpieces that probably weren't even connected. Their van idled at the curb, puffing diesel fumes into the crisp air. Brenda stood front and center, leopard print cardigan, blonde helmet of hair, lips curled in that smug half-smile. "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding," she said sweetly. "But the lawyers will sort it out. You should probably start packing." I stared at her for a long moment, coffee mug still warm in my hand. Then I said calmly, "I'll take it under advisement." Her smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "I said I'll take it under advisement. Have a nice day, Brenda." Then I closed the door, watched her through the blinds as she stood there for a few seconds, face tightening, before storming off in those ridiculous heels. First call, Consuela. She answered on the second ring. "Please tell me you're looking at what I think you're looking at." I said. If you're holding a fake eviction notice, then yes, she replied. I sent her a photo. A moment later, I heard her laugh, dark, humorless. Garrett, this is fraud. She's impersonating legal authority. You could file criminal charges right now. Not yet, I said. I want to see how far she'll go. Second move, exposure. I posted the eviction notice to the Pinehurst Meadows Facebook group. No commentary, just the image and a short caption. Anyone else getting these? The post blew up. Dozens of comments. 12 other families came forward, all hit with the same harassment, the same fake legal threats. All pressured to sell. Brenda's loyalists called me a troublemaker. Accused me of hurting property values. But the neutral residents started asking questions. Tough ones. That's when a private message appeared in my inbox. It was from Dell, a retired electrician built like a tank with a mustache straight out of an 80s cop show. Check the HOA financials, he wrote. Something's off. We used to have budget for repairs and landscaping. Now Brenda says we're broke. I pulled up my records request again. 60 days. No documents. She was now in direct violation of state law. Time to dig deeper. North Carolina requires HOAs that elect certain tax treatments to file. Form 1120H with the IRS, a simple annual return showing income and expenses. And the best part? Those filings are public record. Anyone can access them if they know where to look. Within 20 minutes, I found Pinehurst Meadows HOA's tax return. The numbers nearly made me drop my coffee. Total dues collected for 2022-2023, $142,000. That checked out, 140 homes. $85 a month? But under landscaping and maintenance, the HOA claimed $89,000 in expenses. That didn't sit right, so I called the company listed, Greene County Lawn Care. Hey, I said, what's your annual contract with Pinehurst Meadows HOA? The man on the phone didn't hesitate. $31,000 a year. Been that way since 2020, $31,000 a year, yet Brenda had reported $89,000 in spending. That left $58,000 missing. Right then. I knew. This wasn't just HOA harassment. It was embezzlement. And Brenda had just declared war on the wrong homeowner. That night, I sat in the glow of my laptop, cross-referencing every check image from the HOA records that I'd finally pried loose. Consuela had threatened to sue, and suddenly Brenda's so-called audit was magically complete. Each payment that was supposedly made to Greene County Lawn Care told a different story. The payee wasn't Greene County at all, it was Pinehurst Property Solutions, LLC. A quick Google search told me everything. Registered agent? Kenneth Cowich, Brenda's brother. I leaned back in my chair, the room lit only by the blue glow of my screen. The bitter smell of burned coffee filled the air. I'd left the pot on too long. $58,000, funneled straight from HOA funds into a shell company run by Brenda's family. My phone buzzed. A text from Dell, emergency HOA meeting next week. Brenda's calling a vote to raise dues 40% to cover legal fees against frivolous challenges. Translation, me, another text from Iris. She's going to make you the villain. Be careful, I smiled to myself. Let her try. Because what Brenda didn't realize, what she was about to learn the hard way, was that I'd been preparing for this moment since that very first truck violation. I opened my property folder, Summit Holdings NC LLC, and scanned through the 6 deeds under that name. 6 homes in Pinehurst Meadows, all quiet, all rented, and one of them caught my eye. 349 Cypress Lane. Owner, Summit Holdings, NC tenant, Brenda Cowich. Brenda's rental. Her lease had expired months ago. She was on a month-to-month extension. And according to my property manager's reports, she was 2 months behind on rent. I picked up the phone. Send a standard 10-day pay or quit notice to 349 Cypress, I told him. If the tenant doesn't pay, we file eviction. He hesitated. You sure? It's almost Christmas. I'm sure, I said. Business is business. I didn't tell him who the tenant was. He'd find out soon enough. Brenda had been playing with fake eviction notices. Now she'd see what a real one looked like. 2 days later, the emergency meeting notice hit mailboxes, exactly 48 hours before the scheduled time, the legal minimum under North Carolina HOA law. Brenda was careful like that, always dancing at the edge of legality without crossing the line. But this time, she went further. Each envelope contained a glossy, full-color flyer printed on heavy cardstock, wrapped in red, white, and blue borders. The headline read, "Protecting Our Community from Outside Agitators." Below it, a photo of my truck, taken from an unflattering angle highlighting a small door dent. The caption, "Commercial eyesore degrading property values." The text accused me, not by name but by implication, of being a greedy outsider suing the HOA and driving up everyone's costs. Not a single outright lie, but every line crafted to poison the well. My mail carrier handed it to me with an awkward shrug. "She mailed these to every house," she said quietly. I held the flyer up to the light, studying the thick paper. The print job alone must have cost nearly $300, likely paid from HOA funds, or maybe Brenda's personal stash. At this point, the two were probably the same. The neighborhood split almost instantly. About 60% of residents ignored it. Normal people with lives, jobs, and better things to do than HOA drama. Another 25%, Brenda's loyalists, the retirees, and book club clique, parroted her talking points at the mailbox and pool. But the remaining 15%, the ones she'd harassed, they'd had enough. They launched a counter-campaign, an email chain titled "Know the Truth." Screenshots of HOA finances, selective enforcement evidence, testimony from Iris and the new ins. I stayed quiet publicly. Let them fight that battle. I was planning a different kind of strike. That Sunday afternoon, I invited Dell, Iris, and the Newen family over. My kitchen table turned into a war room. Property records spread like maps before a campaign. The smell of Iris's homemade gingerbread filled the air. She'd brought cookies because kindness was her default, even in a fight. "I need to show you something," I said, laying out 6 deeds. "All of these, 6 properties, are mine, owned under Summit Holdings NC, Dell blinked. "You own 6 houses here?" "6 rentals," I said. "All maintained, all rented to good people." "And Brenda doesn't know," Iris frowned. "Why tell us now?" "Because I need your help," I said. "And because it's time to stop playing defense." I explained the math. 6 properties out of 140 gave me 6 votes in HOA matters. 1 per property, standard bylaw stuff. And under state law, it only takes 10% of owners, just 14 signatures, to demand a recall election. Dell grinned, a spark lighting behind his eyes. 14 signatures? "We can get that before dinner." "Already done," I said, sliding a clipboard across the table. 17 signatures, neatly inked. I'd been collecting quietly for weeks. Mr. Newen leaned forward. "When do we pull the trigger?" "After Brenda's meeting," I said. "Let her think she's untouchable first." Then Iris tilted her head. "You know she doesn't own her house, right?" "Brenda rents. One of those Ashford models on Cypress Lane." The room fell silent. Cypress Lane. My pulse quickened. I opened my property spreadsheet on the laptop, scrolled down the addresses. There it was, 349 Cypress Lane, Ashford model. Purchased at an estate sale last year. Owner, Summit Holdings, NC. Tenant, Brenda Kowich. I stared at the screen, then started laughing. Sharp, incredulous laughter that filled the room. Dell raised an eyebrow. "What's funny?" "She's my tenant," I said, turning the laptop toward them. "Brenda, the HOA president who tried to evict me, rents her house from me." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Iris started laughing too, a bubbling, uncontrollable sound that felt like relief after months of tension. "Oh, that's perfect," she said between breaths. That's poetic justice. It was. Almost too poetic. After everyone left that night, I sat back at my desk and reviewed Brenda's lease. Standard residential terms. Initial 1-year period, now month to month. Rent, and $850 a month. 2 months unpaid, $3,700 owed. Then I noticed another clause. No business may be conducted on the premises without written consent of the owner. Brenda had been running the HOA out of her rental, storing records, hosting meetings, even listing the address on official letterhead. Each act a clear violation of her lease. I called my property manager again. "Draft a 10-day pay-or-quit notice for 349 Cypress," I said. "Standard language, but don't serve it yet. Hold until I give the word," he hesitated. "You sure? Right before the holidays?" "I'm sure," I said. This is business, but deep down I knew this wasn't just business anymore. This was strategy, because in 3 days at that emergency HOA meeting, Brenda planned to stand before the neighborhood and paint me as the villain. She had no idea she was about to give her big speech from my house. The night before the meeting, Brenda fired off one final email blast to every homeowner in Pinehurst Meadows. The subject line read, "Tomorrow we vote to protect our neighborhood. Every voice matters." I hit reply all. My response was short and polite. "I agree. See everyone at 7 p.m. 20 minutes later, Dell forwarded me a screenshot from Brenda's private group chat. Her message to her book club read, "He won't show." Cowards never do. That made me smile. I set my alarm for 6:30 a.m., laid out my clothes, printed 3 copies of the audit summary, and went to bed. Brenda thought she was walking into a routine HOA meeting. She had no idea what was waiting for her. December 12th, 7 p.m. The clubhouse reeked of stale coffee and lemon. Cleaner. Metal folding chairs screeched against the floor as nearly 50 residents crowded in, the largest turnout in Pinehurst Meadows history. Brenda sat at the front, gavel in hand, wearing her navy blazer like a corporate executive. Her confidence was radiant, too radiant. To her left, the book club clique, 12 women strong, already nodding along, ready to agree with whatever she said. Dell and Iris sat among the crowd, blending in, playing it smart, and I took a quiet seat in the back corner. Brenda spotted me. Her eyes flicked in surprise, but only for a moment before that practiced smile returned. She raised her gavel and called the meeting to order. "Let's keep this brief," she began. "First agenda item, a vote to raise dues by 40%. Effective January 1st to cover increased legal and operational costs." Dell stood immediately. "Point of order. Where's the budget justification?" Brenda didn't flinch. "Legal costs," she said smoothly, "which Mr. Garrett's frivolous complaints have caused." I stood calmly. "I'd like to see an itemized invoice for those costs." "That's confidential attorney-client material," she replied. "Actually," I said, walking toward the front, "under North Carolina Statute 47F3118, HOA financial records belong to the members, and I have copies." I connected my laptop to the clubhouse TV. The first image filled the screen. Check images showing payments to Pinehurst Property Solutions, LLC. "You claimed $89,000 in landscaping expenses over 2 years," I said. "The actual contractor billed just $31,000 annually. That's a $58,000 discrepancy." Gasps rippled through the room. I clicked to the next slide. Business registration details. Showing Kenneth Kowich as the registered agent. "Your brother," Brenda. Her face turned crimson. Foundation cracking under sweat. "Kenneth provides consulting services," she stammered. "For what projects?" I asked. "There are no contracts, no invoices, only checks written to a shell company." The crowd leaned in. Smartphones lifted. Cameras recording, I pressed on. I moved to table the dues increase and call for a full independent audit of all HOA finances. A voice vote followed. Overwhelming ayes. Brenda tried to gavel it down, but residents shouted over her. She snapped, "Fine, we'll audit. But first, let's deal with the real problem. Absentee investors who don't live here and don't care about this community." Then she pointed directly at me. "He owns multiple rentals. Probably a slumlord? We should ban rentals entirely." Some murmurs rose in agreement. I stayed calm. "Yes," I said evenly. "I do own rentals. 6, in fact. All well-maintained, occupied by good people, a nurse, a teacher, 2 retirees, young families. 0 complaints. I pulled up the county GIS map. 6 green dots appeared. My properties. And under our bylaws, each property gets 1 vote, I continued. That gives me 6 votes in any board decision. I paused. Let it sink in, which is why I'm calling for a special recall election to remove the current board. Gasps again. Per North Carolina law, I only need 10% of homeowners to petition for it. That's 14 signatures. I held up a folder. I have 20. I handed the petition to Brenda. Her face drained of color. You can't do this, she whispered, trembling, then louder. This is my board. It's the members' board, I said quietly. And you violated your fiduciary duty. The gavel slipped from her hand. She grabbed her purse, knocked her chair over, and stormed out. The clubhouse door slammed so hard the windows shook. For a heartbeat. Silence. Then applause. Hesitant at first, then building. By the time I sat back down, half the room was cheering, but that was just the beginning. My real move hadn't been played yet. The next few weeks blurred together. Long days of coffee, spreadsheets, and strategy. Dell started calling our group the kitchen cabinet. We met at my house 2 days after the meeting. Dell brought his union instincts and mechanical precision. Iris, with decades of neighborhood memory, remembered what the HOA used to stand for. And Canuela, Vern, the firebrand attorney, arrived. With legal strategy and a flask of bourbon she didn't bother hiding the smell of Iris's gingerbread mixed with wood smoke as we got to work. First, Canuela said, flipping her notes, we secure your legal flank. Brenda already crossed a line when she drafted that fake eviction notice. Unauthorized legal threats. That's a violation under state law. She could face fines or worse. She slid a new cease and desist across the table. This one was ironclad, alleging fraud. Embezzlement and selective enforcement. We'd send it to both Brenda and her downtown law firm. Second, Dell said, tapping the spreadsheets. We prove exactly how much she stole. He'd called in a retired IRS auditor named Phyllis, an older woman with a sharp tongue and a sharper calculator, Phyllis. Combed through 3 years of HOA statements. Her findings were brutal. $58,000 funneled to her, brother's fake landscaping company. $12,000 charged at Home Goods and TJ Maxx for office supplies. $7,000 paid as a legal retainer to a firm that never billed. The HOA, a kickback to a friend's husband. Total? $77,000 misappropriated in 3 years. She didn't even try to hide it, Phyllis said, shaking her head. Half these charges are candles and picture frames. Then came the third issue, the tenant. On December 15th, my property manager called. The tenant at 349 Cypress still hasn't paid. It's been 10 days since notice. Want me to file eviction? I knew the process. Filing fee, summons, short hearing. All by the book. File it, I said, but don't serve it yet. Wait until after the recall election. Because Brenda didn't just face an audit or a recall. She was about to face something much worse. An eviction. From a house she didn't even realize she rented from the man she'd tried to destroy. Timing was everything. I wanted every move to land exactly when it mattered most. Our fourth priority was community engagement. The Nguyen family took the lead, launching a Pinterest truth page on Instagram and Facebook. They posted side-by-side photos, Brenda's friends with unpainted fences, RVs parked for months, and lawns like jungles. 0 citations, then ours. Spotless yards, perfect paint, every minor detail documented with violation notices. The hypocrisy was laid bare, the posts spread like wildfire. Within days, HOA groups across the Charlotte area were sharing them. One of the local news stations, WCNC, even reached out asking for an interview. I declined. Not yet. The timing wasn't right. Fifth priority, the recall election. We scheduled it for January 15th, exactly 30 days after filing the petition. Everything had to be airtight. We hired an independent monitor, Patricia, a retired paralegal who'd spent 2 decades overseeing union elections. She had no stake in the outcome, only a reputation for fairness. We ran it like a professional campaign. Dell agreed to run for president. Iris stepped up for treasurer. Marcus, a quiet retired teacher who'd stayed neutral until the financial audit, accepted the nomination for secretary. We printed clean, simple flyers, White background, bold letters, transparency, accountability, community. Brenda's counter-campaign was the opposite. A grainy photocopy slipped under doors that read, "Don't let outsiders destroy our neighborhood." Through small leaks in her circle, we started hearing whispers. One of Brenda's book club friends had a husband who played poker with Dell. That's how we learned she'd hired a private investigator, her nephew, unlicensed, charging her $200 a day to dig up dirt on me. He found nothing. Honorable military discharge. Perfect credit. Taxes up to date. No criminal record. The only blemish on my record was a speeding ticket from 2018. She was desperate. Then she tried something even bolder, amending the CC&Rs to ban all rental properties retroactively. Canuella shut that down within hours. CC&R amendments require a 75% homeowner vote. A board can't just rewrite the rules to fit its own vendetta. By Christmas week, the chaos went quiet. Too quiet. I hung white lights along my porch and placed a simple wreath on the door. That evening, I found an unsigned Christmas card in my mailbox. Inside, written in shaky handwriting, "Thank you for standing up." A grateful neighbor. The card shimmered under the porch light, embossed snowflake glinting like frost. I smiled. Probably Iris. That same day, Brenda's lawyer emailed another letter, threatening a defamation suit if I continued spreading falsehoods about Ms. Kowich's character. I printed it, framed it, and hung it in my garage next to my Marine Corps flag. By then, her legal threats were just noise, spam mail I mentally archived and ignored. Then came the night before the election, January 14th. I couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes. The digital clock glowed 3:47 a.m. This stopped being about my truck months ago. Now it was about everyone Brenda had hurt. Families she'd fined into silence, retirees she'd intimidated, homeowners she'd targeted for her flipping scheme. I checked my security cameras. The street was still. No movement. No sabotage. Tomorrow would decide if integrity still mattered, even in a place as small as a homeowners association. But the next morning, I discovered how far she was willing to go, January 3rd. My truck sat in the driveway, its entire driver's side carved with deep, deliberate scratches, metal exposed like raw bone. I stood in the freezing air, breath fogging, running my hand along the gouges. Whoever did it hadn't rushed. They wanted me to see their anger. My neighbor's Ring camera caught a partial view, a dark sedan at 2 a.m., driver in a hoodie. Not enough for a charge, but enough to know it wasn't random. I filed a police report. The officer was polite, sympathetic, but realistic. "Could have been kids," he said. "It was someone with a grudge," I replied. I didn't name names. Didn't have to. That afternoon, I installed 6 new cameras around my property. Every angle. All uploading to cloud storage. If she wanted to play dirty, I'd have proof. 2 days later, Brenda escalated. New flyers, printed on colored paper this time, appeared in every mailbox. "Investor threatens our safety." She accused me of renting to unvetted criminals and implied my properties were drug dens. No evidence. Just fear. The new ones fired back online with receipts, photos of clean homes, lawns trimmed, testimonials from tenants, a nurse, a teacher, 2 retirees, every one of them respectable, grateful, proud to live here. But offline, the damage spread. People who didn't use social media started believing her lies. At the grocery store, neighbors I'd waved to for years avoided eye contact. One woman crossed the street to escape me. Then came the call that hit hardest. One of my tenants, a teacher, sounded shaken. "My principal asked if I live in a problem property," she said. "This is affecting my job." That's when it stopped being a game. Brenda wasn't just coming after me anymore. She was dragging innocent people down with her. On January 8th, my property manager called again. "Your tenant at 349 Cypress still hasn't paid," he said. 3 months behind, 550 total. "Want me to proceed with eviction?" "Yes," I said quietly. "File the case. Standard summary ejectment. But don't serve her yet." Timing had to be perfect. Then Brenda crossed the final line, January 10th. She showed up at Dell's house holding an envelope of cash. His wife Marlene overheard everything from inside. Brenda offered him $2,000 to withdraw from the election and publicly endorse her. Dell, the same man who'd spent decades as a union steward, told her flatly to leave. She tried again, calling it a consulting fee for community improvement. He didn't budge. She left the envelope sitting on his porch railing and walked away. Dell called me right after. "You're not going to believe this," he said. Marlene wrote a sworn affidavit detailing every word, every minute of that exchange. Canuella filed it immediately, both with the magistrate, court as supporting evidence, and with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission as an ethics. Complaint, bribery, embezzlement, fraud, harassment. Brenda was stacking up violations like parking, tickets. Then came January 12th, 3. Days before the election, I was at the gas station filling, up when Brenda pulled into the pump beside mine. Her perfume hit before her voice. She got out, saw me, and stiffened. "You've ruined this neighborhood," she said loudly, making sure others could hear. "You're a parasite. You don't even live in half those houses." I didn't respond. Just watched the numbers on the pump rise. When it clicked off, I replaced the nozzle, looked at her, and said quietly, "And you don't even own yours." The words hit like a hammer. Her face went white, then flushed red. Her hands trembled as she tried to swipe her card. She knew that I knew. I got in my truck and drove away, watching her shrink in the rearview mirror, alone, shaking, card still in her hand. The next morning, January 13th, Brenda sent out one final lie, an email to all residents claiming the election had been postponed due to procedural errors. Patricia, our independent monitor, immediately replied to everyone with a correction. The election will proceed as scheduled. And just like that, the countdown began. The election went forward exactly as scheduled, January 15th, 6 p.m. sharp. Patricia, our independent monitor, sent out a final notice. Election proceeds as planned. Ignore all misinformation. That same evening, local news station WCNC aired their segment, 4 minutes that hit like a thunderclap. Footage of the fake eviction notice, the financial inconsistencies, and quiet, steady interviews with Iris and me. The reporter, Kendra, had done her homework, laid everything out with precision. By midnight, the video had gone viral, over 300,000 views in less than a day. At 11:30 p.m., Brenda lost control. She posted a rage-fueled Facebook rant. All caps, spelling errors, wild accusations, and promises to reveal the real truth. But there was no truth left for her to twist. Just the sound of her crumbling credibility echoing across social media. Even her closest supporters began quietly unfollowing her. I slept soundly that night, because the next day the community would finally decide. And the day after that, if fate was feeling poetic, she'd be served with her own eviction papers, the very same fate she'd once tried to hand me, Election Day. January 15th, at exactly 4 p.m. 2 hours before the polls opened, a sheriff's deputy knocked on Brenda's front door at 349 Cypress Lane. I didn't plan the timing. Pure coincidence. But it was beautiful coincidence. The magistrate court had finally processed my eviction filing. The sheriff's civil division handled it by the book. They served Brenda with an official summons, right there on her porch, the same porch where she'd held her private HOA meetings and plotted her control. Dell texted me a screenshot from the neighborhood group chat moments later. "Anyone know why there's a cop car at Brenda's?" I didn't answer, just smiled. Because Brenda didn't need anyone to explain it. She knew exactly what it meant the second she saw the uniform. She opened that envelope and read the words. "Notice to appear. Summary ejectment action." And beneath that, my LLC's name listed as plaintiff, the man she'd once tried to evict with a fake notice, was now legally evicting her. An hour later, she showed up early to the clubhouse. I was already there, helping Patricia set up the ballot box and registration table. Brenda looked hollow. Her hair was overstyled, her makeup heavier than usual. A mask to hide the exhaustion and the fear she couldn't control. She clutched her purse like a shield and avoided eye contact. By 6 p.m., the clubhouse was packed beyond capacity. 89 residents, the largest turnout in neighborhood history. The air was thick with tension and the smell of burnt coffee and takeout food. In the back corner, WCNC's camera crew waited, ready to capture whatever came next. Patricia stood at the front and called the meeting to order. Not Brenda. That moment alone marked the beginning of change. Members will vote first, Patricia announced. Candidates may speak briefly afterward while ballots are counted. Brenda tried to interrupt. To assert authority she no longer had. As current president, I should... Patricia cut her off firmly. Miss Colwich, you're a candidate now, not the presiding officer. Please take your seat. The look Brenda gave could have turned water to stone. Voting began. Paper ballots, privacy screens, the soft rustle of folded votes dropping into the locked box, democracy distilled into the purest form. While Patricia and 3 volunteers counted in the next room, the atmosphere in the main hall grew heavier. Brenda sat stiff and silent, arms crossed, surrounded by a few remaining loyalists, murmuring false comfort. Across the room, Dell met my gaze and gave a small nod. We'd done our part. Now it was up to them. Then, predictably, Brenda snapped. She stood abruptly, voice trembling with anger. These people deserve to know who they're really electing, she shouted, pointing directly at me. He's a slumlord, an absentee investor who doesn't care about this community, just profit. The room went tense. Patricia hesitated, then sighed. Mr. Garrett, you may respond. I rose slowly, calm and deliberate. 89 pairs of eyes followed me as I walked to the front. Brenda's partially right, I began. I do own rental properties here, 6 of them to be exact. I bought them as investments, yes, but also because I believe in this neighborhood. I maintain them. I care about the people who live in them. They're good tenants, teachers, nurses, families, and I take pride in giving them a home they can be proud of. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. But here's what Brenda didn't tell you. I opened it and held up a lease. Agreement. She rents one of those properties from me. Has for 14 months. The room went utterly silent. You could hear the hum of the ceiling fan. 409 Cypress Lane, I continued. Brenda's been my tenant since May of last year. She's currently 3 months behind on rent, $5,550 overdue. And as of 4 p.m. today, I raised the second document. She's been served with a lawful eviction notice. The real kind. The silence shattered like glass. Gasps, shouts, nervous laughter. Brenda's face turned crimson. That's illegal. Retaliation! You can't... It's not retaliation, I said evenly. It's business. You breached your lease, non-payment of rent, and unauthorized business activities. Every HOA meeting you hosted at your dining room table violated your rental terms. This eviction is entirely legal. From the back, Canuela, the HOA attorney, stood up. I've reviewed the documents, she said clearly. Everything's legitimate. Sheriff has already served it. Ms. Colwich will have her court date soon. Brenda froze. Then her voice broke. You planned this. You orchestrated everything. I responded to your actions, I said quietly. Every step of the way. You wanted to weaponize evictions, so I showed you how it's really done. Her eyes filled with tears. Mascara streaked down her face as she snatched her purse, knocked her chair over, and ran out. The slam of the clubhouse door echoed like a closing chapter. No one followed her. Not even her friends. Patricia raised her gavel. Order, please. We have results. The room hushed. Hearts pounding. President, Del Garner, 71 votes. Brenda Colwich, 8 votes. Treasurer, Iris Chen, 68 votes. Secretary, Marcus Reed, 64 votes. For a moment, silence. Then, eruption, applause, cheers, tears. Relief and justice rolled through the crowd like a wave. Del stepped forward, took the gavel from Patricia, and lifted it high. First order of business, he said, voice steady. I move that we rescind all violation, notices from the past 12 months, and refund any fines paid. The response was, thunderous. Iris stood next. I move that we hire an independent auditor to review HOA finances within 60 days. Another. Unanimous yes from the back of the room. I watched. After months of chaos, fear, and deceit, the community was finally reclaiming itself. Justice didn't roar that night. It whispered, steady, quiet and unstop. The victory wasn't mine alone. It belonged to everyone in Pinehurst Meadows. Outside, the January air bit at our faces, but neighbors approached one by one, shaking my hand, hugging me, sharing quiet words of gratitude. Iris's eyes sparkled as she said, "You gave us our neighborhood back." I smiled. "We did it together." Dell clapped my shoulder. "Drinks this weekend." "You earned it, Marine." For a moment, I stood alone, watching the clubhouse. Warm light spilled through the windows, spilling onto the icy pavement. The fortress Brenda had built, the headquarters of her petty tyranny, now belonged to the people again. This is what community should feel like. By February 15th, Brenda had moved out of 349 Cypress Lane, avoiding the formal eviction hearing. She left chaos behind. Holes in drywall, stained carpet, broken appliances. I kept her security deposit and billed her for an additional
Messages poured in from
HOA victims nationwide.
She never paid.
People fighting
Some
their own
victories,
Brendas.
I reminded myself,
Last September,
aren't about
someone
money.
from Raleigh
They're about
reached out
principle.
about a near-identical situation.
The independent audit
Investors
wrapped up February
harassed by a
28th,
corrupt board,
confirming Phyllis's
I spent a
forensic
weekend
accounting
compiling a
findings.
detailed guide.
$77,000
of HOA
strategies,
funds had been
legal
misappropriated
steps,
over 3
state-by-state
years.
resources.
The new board
I posted
filed a
it
police
online for
report.
free.
The DA
40,000
declined to
downloads in the
prosecute.
first month.
That's
White-collar
a story
crime
for
often
another
takes
day.
a back seat.
Exactly
Civil
1 year
action
after the
followed.
election,
Brenda and her
January
brother
15th,
Kenneth faced a
2025,
lawsuit.
I hosted an open
Kenneth's
house.
landscaping company
Casual,
had actual
drop-in
assets.
from 4 to 8 p.m.
He repaid $40,000
The smell of
to
chili
avoid criminal
simmered,
charges.
cornbread
Brenda
baked,
declared bankruptcy
Iris's
and
gingerbread
disappeared.
cookies filled
Florida,
the air.
last anyone
30
heard,
neighbors
her
packed
next
the living
playground,
room.
Pinehurst
Kids
Meadows
ran
began to
underfoot.
heal.
The new
Dell
board's
manned
first
the chili
chili
days
station.
were transformative.
Classic rock
Dues
played
dropped
softly in the
15%
background.
once the
He
embezzlement
raised his
overhead disappeared.
To Garrett,
Enforcement
having the guts
became
to say
fair
enough.
and transparent.
Photographic
The crowd
evidence required,
To Garrett,
30-day cure
my throat
periods,
tightened.
formal
Eyes
appeals with
stung.
witnesses and
To all of us,
documentation.
I added.
In
Iris
April,
smiled.
60 residents
We took
turned
our
out
neighborhood
for a
back
community
together and
work
made
day,
it better than before.
painting the clubhouse,
Warm
mulching
hugs,
common areas,
firm handshakes,
planting native
a
wildflowers.
toddler grabbing my pant
Iris's
leg.
idea for
These were the
pollinator
real
plants brought the
victories.
neighborhood
This
together.
fight had never
The
been
smell
about
of fresh
trucks,
mulch
grass,
and paint
or eviction
mingled with
notices.
spring air.
It was about
Kids ran
dignity,
freely,
about
neighbors
living
talked
without
again.
petty tyrants
The community
dictating your
was
every
alive.
move.
And we
I
won.
updated all 6 rental
If you're
leases
dealing with
an
simple
overreaching
HOA
anti-harassment
document
addendum.
everything.
If any
Photos,
tenant faced
timestamps,
frivolous
emails.
violations,
Know
I
your
would
state's
handle the
laws,
appeals
record
personally
access,
and at my expense.
recall elections,
word
dispute
spread,
resolution,
and other investor
find
owners
allies.
began adopting the same
Power in
language.
numbers matters.
By late March,
Use
I
public
sat on my
records,
porch
tax
where months
filings,
ago,
property deeds,
Brenda had slapped
meeting
that
minutes,
fake eviction
they're all out
notice
there.
across my chest.
Stay calm, stay
Everything
factual,
felt
stay
different.
relentless.
Bullies want you to
blossoms
react
scented the air.
emotionally. Remain
Kids played
professional,
basketball 3
and never
houses
make
down.
it personal.
The hoop
This
wasn't
isn't
a
revenge,
violation
it's
anymore.
justice.
Now I
Neighbors
want to hear
waved.
from you.
Drop
Simple,
a comment.
normal life.
What's the most ridiculous
In May,
HOA
Dell
fine
suggested
you
a bold
faced?
idea.
What violation
Turn
still
the
makes you laugh or
$40,000
rage?
recovered from
Are you
Kenneth
battling
into
a
something
HOA
meaningful?
nightmare? Share your
The board
story.
agreed
Maybe we'll
unanimously,
feature it and help you
establishing
win.
the Pinehurst
If this story
Community
gave you that
Fund,
sweet justice
college
satisfaction,
scholarships for local
subscribe.
students,
We
home
cover
repair
HOA
assistance
battles,
for elderly
landlord
and
tenant
disabled
victories,
residents.
small claims triumphs.
I seeded
Ring
it
the bell.
with $10,000.
You don't want to miss what's coming next.
The first scholarship
Until then,
awarded
know
in
your
August
rights,
went
stand
to
your
a high school
ground,
senior
and never
whose
let
mother
the
rented
Karens
one of my
win.
properties.
Peace.
A full ride to UNC Charlotte's
Tomorrow, the
engineering
neighborhood would
program.
finally decide
The
whose
award
version of
ceremony was at the
community they
clubhouse.
truly believed
The girl's
in.
tearful thanks and her mother's sobs filled the room. I sat in the back, blinking, throat tight. This is what HOAs should do. Iris proposed transforming an unused HOA lot into a pollinator meadow and community garden. The board approved immediately. Ribbon cutting in September. 60 residents attended. Kids ran through waist-high wildflowers, Dell's raised garden beds ready for planting. Local news covered the story. Headlines screamed, HOA transforms after scandal into model community. But OCNC followed up in October. Kendra interviewed Dell, Iris, and me, contrasting before and after images of violation notices and gardens, fear versus hope. I told the camera, HOAs aren't inherently bad, but they demand transparency, accountability, and residents willing to stand up when things go wrong. The segment won a regional Emmy.